So once again, thank you so much for joining us. As I said, we're recording. I'm joined today by Amelia and Michelle from the Open Environmental Data Project. Our colleagues, Greg Gearheart, Rafael Maestu, Paul Williams, and Nicole Morgan, as well as by the Eunice Katz from the California State Water Resources Control Board. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to give you a little bit of a description about OEDP. This is a series of, one in a series of environmental data remix workshops that we've been holding. Our mission at OEDP is to reimagine the way we collect, use, and share environmental data. We focus on how environmental data is used by and moves between communities, government, and researchers. And our goal is to strengthen multi-sector approaches to more equitable environmental governance. I'm going to introduce Nicole Morgan here in a second. Nicole has been appointed as the civil engineer to the State Water Resources Control Board by Governor Newsom a couple of years ago, and she previously served as the assistant deputy director in the Water Board's Division of Financial Assistance, where she worked on projects providing funding for drinking water and other improvement projects. So thank you so much for joining us, Nicole, and take it away.
And thank you, Katie. Welcome, everyone. And huge thanks to all the participants for helping us improve the public's data we collect and use to drive our efforts to deliver the principles of the human right to water resolution and the safe and affordable funding for equity and resilience. The State Board is leading in how we both advance equity and use open data to engage the public around this data. We still have lots of work to do to keep improving the accessibility of data. This means for everyone. It's important for me as a board member and as a civil engineer to be able to see the data we have available across our various programs, what data others may have, and where there may be data gaps. This helps me to inform the decisions that I have to make as a board member. And also just, looking back as, being a civil engineer in previous lives on, different parts of my career, just looking at how having good data and really understanding what data is available, how that was able to, either, help me to inform, making a decision about how to design a water treatment facility, how to either, decide what processes need to be put in place to provide safe drinking water to a community, to make sure that we were meeting the standards, to make sure that water at the end of the construction project was going to be able to be safe. Also, just make sure that so not only just that piece, but then also, understanding what the environmental impacts that our water has. And that all revolves around having good data, understanding what that data truly means, and how I'm able to use that data to inform whether it was now as a board member to make those decisions, or in that previous life, how to inform my design decisions in order to make sure that I was designing and planning the best facility, and making sure that I wasn't perhaps over designing it, or please, never under designing the facility. That would have been really wrong. So just making sure that I was doing my best, and that is really what is important to me, is making sure that we're always doing our best. And so I assure you that we will use your recommendations and feedback from this workshop to improve how we do both program and policy work, as well as data and information work. I look forward to the report. Thank you again. And I would like to hand this back to Katie at the Open Environmental Data Project.
Thank you so much, Nicole. We're very grateful to have you here with us today. And thank you for kicking that off. All great examples of the great things we can do when we have access to open and usable environmental data. So with that, I'm just going to go over the kind of high-level goals of this workshop, and and then a little bit about our agenda today, and then some group agreements. So as many of you probably know from our communication over email, we're here to collaboratively brainstorm ways to enhance or repurpose the water board's drinking water data sets. And as Nicole mentioned, we are hoping to offer very actionable recommendations for altering these data sets towards accessibility and usability, or planning for future iterations. And if Amelia, if you would grab that landing document and paste it into the chat, that would be great. This document should give you an idea of how we're hoping to do that today. We are in the middle of the welcome and introductions and group agreements. After this, we're going to kick it over to Greg, Rafael, and Paul to talk about scene settings. So they're going to go over the data sets that many of you have already seen. Thank you, Amelia. We'll break out into different groups kind of based on your level of experience with the data. You'll be able to self-select into whichever group you'd like. We'll talk about some of these challenges that we've had and ways that you've worked around them, and other ideas you have for improving the data sets and their access. And then we'll come back together, regroup, and synthesize and close out with some next steps. You'll also find in this document a link to the dataset descriptions that should already have been emailed to you, as well as our code of conduct. You will also eventually find in this document, we'll paste them in a little bit, links to the kind of notes documents that we'll use during the breakout group. So we're going to wait until we actually go into those groups to paste it. But in case you ever want to come back and look at them, add more ideas, you're more than welcome to. Some group agreements. Our major goal here is to create a space where you can all share your perspectives freely. We also ask that you don't post pictures, directly quote or attribute quotes to people on social media unless you've received permission to do so. We hope this conversation sparks ideas and points that we can act on. Thank you, Michelle, for pasting these into the chat. We ask that you be respectful of others, trying to aim for one statement at a time. I think this says the Etherpad, but this will actually be a Google Doc. There'll be space in the Google Doc for thoughts if you want to share, and there'll also be time to speak. We have a typical code of conduct, and that link is in the landing doc that I just mentioned. As I mentioned, we'll be recording the part of this presentation, and you're welcome to turn your camera off. And then finally, during the breakout rooms, we'll be using Otter AI, which is an app that takes voice to text transcription. We're not going to share that outside of this workshop. Those are mostly just to help us so we don't have to furiously take notes, and we can engage more fully with you all. But that will not be shared publicly. If you have any questions about any of those kinds of things, please feel free to message myself, Michelle, or Amelia. We are the OEDP folks on the call. And if you have any concerns, just let us know and we can work with it. Okay, great. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Greg, and he's going to start some scene setting.
We have a full slide deck that we have to get through too, but I'm really excited about this. This is a work that started with a sort of a random meeting. I got invited to a conversation or a set of dialogues across the country with Open Environmental Data Project team members about how to reuse data after it's been sort of declared open and public and sort of, you know, hands washed by government entities and others, and saying, cool, we put the data out there, like what other people might downstream, so to speak, use that data. And it started this great conversation that resulted in the idea of having a remix workshop in California around certain data topics. And so we iterated on how to do that, and you'll see the results of that here in a minute. But I want to first orient you all a little bit to who we are at the water boards, what we do and why we do it. And so I apologize, some of you have probably seen some of these slides before, but it'll go quickly. So the college, or the Office of Information Management and Analysis, is one of about 14 divisions and offices at the State Water Board. We serve the whole organization. So there's 10 boards that make up the California Water Boards. These all have governor appointed board members, like Nicole Morgan was appointed to the state board. There's 5 board members at, or excuse me, 7 at the regions and 5 at the state. And so there's 68 governor appointed seats in charge of California's water and water quality across the whole state from the government perspective. And then we also, at the state board, we centralized a few of the functions. So drinking water program, the water rights program, funding and fiscal and administrative services are provided out of the state water board across all the 9 regions and the 10th state water board itself. So our office is, it's small but mighty, in a 2,500 employee organization. We have about 30 folks in our Office of Information Management Analysis. If you don't know what open data is, this is a long list of possible ways to describe it. Most of you know this. The one thing that I'll just mention is that the most important thing about open data is that you are providing it for people that are maybe at different levels of data literacy and need different ways to access the data. So really, it's an iterative process, because what we thought was our best attempt to provide open data in 2015 changed every year, and every time we do something, we learn something more about what's better metadata to describe it. What other ways do people want to interface with that data? Do they want Explorer tools? All sorts of things that we're learning as we go, and we're now at this stage of evolution, so to speak, to think about equity too. So do we need to think about different languages? Do we need to think about interfaces that allow a more equitable access to our open data? Our office wrote a strategic data action plan that was the result of the State Water Board adopting a resolution on open data and good data management principles. That resolution is great. If you haven't seen it, we can drop a link, but out of that grew this strategic data action plan. We have 5 key principles that are mentioned here. They're not really in a stack. This was just a graphical tool, but making data accessible is really a key part of everything that we do. And below that, you have to have the other components. So data literacy is part of the infrastructure for the human side, but it's also a technology component. And then embedding values of data-driven management into our governance, and understanding that quality is not just a thing that the lab provides an extra couple fields about, that quality management is really everything that we need to do, and we need to consider that in how we approach our data and our information. Out of that grew some goals. And I won't go through all of this, but I'll just say, these goals continue to exist as our high-level goals in our office in terms of what we're trying to provide. So access to the water board's data, creating a value for our data, making sure that people understand that they have data, that they should use it. We did surveys of every part of the State Water Board. Rafa and I had conversations with over 100 people. We learned that everyone uses data. It doesn't matter if you're in human resources, training, water quality programs, et cetera. Everyone has a relationship with data. And so that sort of led to this idea that the people part is really important. So enhancing our data culture is not just about the people that I talked about, but the technology. So how do we increase capacity throughout our workflows and data flows? Now, the data lifecycle is at the core of everything that we think about. It is really a guiding light for not only how our office does our work, but how I think everyone relates to this. So where you are in the stage and how you relate to the data is really dependent on understanding that it is a life cycle. And this is a linear path, but it's really a cycle. So at the very beginning of the birth of data, there's some dream to require it or to ask for it or to generate it. And so in our case, because we're regulatory, it's often some form of requirements that says, we're going to put a burden on a group of folks because they need a permit from us or something, and they're going to have to give us some data. So that's the genesis of it all. After that, there's the collecting stage. How hard is that? What are the interfaces like? What kinds of checkers can we do to ensure data quality? There's a storing stage where you'll see more about this, where we have lots of different places that we store data, publishing stage, and then ultimately turning that data into information. The open data slice is just a little thin part really at that stage 3, and how we do that technology stack to provide that open data changes all the time. But that is a key component because you have to sort of expose that to get the feedback loop to work correctly. This is a scary diagram, but you'll see scarier ones later. This was an ideal set of tuna cans that was developed in 2015 era, originally in 2008, but then enhanced to explain where all the data at the water board should go. This is idealistic. This is not exactly, we don't exactly have all these databases and all these data flows. but this was the ideal. And that's really helps explain some of the crazy that we have to deal with. There's well over, I think, 100 enterprise applications that are called databases at the Water Board. At least 50 to 60 of those are considered really vital to the work that we do. So this is our reality, and these are legacy systems that now are trying to emerge into this cloud and sort of modern environment. This is just another way to express that. So on the left, you see what were the cans. We now have this reporting database in the middle that provides some of the resources available. And then we have a lot of people, a really complex ecosystem on the right-hand side that even from this a year or two ago slide, it's changing all the time, how people access, how they want to access it, what do they want to bring it into, what code they use, et cetera, et cetera. Our open data catalog right now is on data.ca.gov. If you go to our organization, you'll see that we have 51 resources or data sets that are found there. So that's up from 40 something a year or so ago. We're constantly putting more things out there and improving what we try to do. And why we do this work is really related to the advancing racial equity efforts at the Water Board. I've personally been involved in that for 3.5 years. We have now a resolution that the state board adopted in 2021. And most recently in January or February, excuse me, I think the State Water Board considered and listened to the final racial equity action plan presented by staff. That's really, really fundamental to a lot of the work that we're doing. It includes the development of a racial equity data action plan that my office, along with public participation, are developing. The work that we did to sort of demonstrate the need was this pollution and prejudice project. These are just some screenshots. It's a story map, and it includes an R-Shiny tool that looks and synthesizes data sets from the Cal EnviroScreen and many of our facility data sets across Cal EPA. So, for example, on the left, you can see that's a look at facilities that show up as hazardous facilities in the city of Oakland, with layers that also communicate Cal EnviroScreen scores and the polygon shapes of historic redlining areas. Water equity is really sort of key to everything we do. There are some definitions of it. I'll make these slides available right after we finish. You guys can go through and look at these for a resource in your breakouts or as you continue. I won't go through it too much. Racial equity, many of these statements are described as you will achieve something equity, like in this case, racial equity, when race is no longer a predictor of life, health, wealth, and other outcomes in some of our more vulnerable communities. So really the key components there are looking at outcomes and considering the idea that your most vulnerable and most marginalized and overburdened communities are really the ones that if you lift them up, you're lifting up by way of intersections all the other parts of our systems. So you have to sort of dig deep and find those areas. Again, the resolution was adopted. There's links to it. It's a great document. If you don't know, we also have this really cool annotated references document that includes every step of the resolution. It includes references behind which that either finding or therefore be it resolved was based on, which is really, really cool. We do open data engagement. Many of you have crossed our paths, or we've crossed your paths with some of the work we did doing the Water Data Challenge or AB 1755 work. Lots of interesting datathons and hackathons and other things that we try to do to really get feedback. This is vital to the data lifecycle, like I mentioned. If we just publish it and never engage with people, we probably won't be fixing things or understanding that there's gaps or data quality issues or what have you. The Data Challenge is another sort of all-star event that we've done a few times. It's right now we're in the lull between awards and the submissions of the final projects. We also are now embracing a project called OpenScapes. We have champions within our office, and we're creating a champion network throughout the Water Board. This is really essentially an open science framework that is fundamentally focused on the people, the communication, and the documentation. It's not a course on how to do coding or GitHub, but it really talks about the value of good code, well-documented code, and version control, which is really what GitHub does. And so the idea is that you have a reusable ecosystem. People come, people go, but you often have to complete the same workflow with data on a regular basis. And again, this applies to the accounting folks, anyone in the organization that does this. So we're really thinking about how to build capacity around this OpenScapes project. So we have a couple other things that we're working on right now, just as an FYI. Badia is here as part of our Civic Spark Fellow partnership, and she is working on a tribal data equity, water data equity initiative. It involves access to data that the tribes are most interested in, as well as some of the information behind the decisions that are used, that are using the data. So for example, impaired water bodies, the tribes really want to know, both what is the data, what's available, what was not considered impaired, what was the reason, and what was the threshold values in the toxicity reports that maybe drove that decision. The OpenScapes project I mentioned also has a really cool website that I showed you a screenshot of. You can go visit. The Data Challenge is having its awards event in August, so we will soon have some way to register for that. But if you would like to participate, I think it'll be in person. I think it's even in San Diego is where we're planning to do it, August 9th and 10th. And then we're continuing to work with the drinking water program on safer visualizations and data flows and improving access to that, including this workshop. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rafa and run his slides for him.
Well, thank you, Greg. So one of the reasons why we want to have this workshop is to hear from the data users. It makes no sense for us to work with make the data public, and if we are not ensuring that the data is actually useful for multiple users and multiple purpose. So go ahead, Greg. So today I want to talk about, what data sets are we making public today, and why are these data sets important? And it's not that simple, because really each one of these data sets has its own complexity, and there's a lot of details that we can probably going to have to be discussing during this workshop today. But this is not the end of it. We're going to keep working on this, making this data better, more complete, and also more reliable and accessible. So these are the 6 data sets that we are making public today for you to use. One of these water systems, the other one is the facilities, which is different from the system. We're also going to be providing a lot of all the water quality monitoring data since 1974. We're also going to be providing you the list of violations and associated enforcement actions. We're going to provide you the data set that is being used to build the needs analysis and the SAFER. And then finally, this is a data set that has already been public for some time, but we think it's also important to be available so you can actually display the information spatially. So next, Greg. So you all have the link to these data sets. We're going to be talking about each one during the work groups. But what is important about this is that for every data set, we are providing the documentation, the data dictionaries, a description of how to use the data, what are the valid values, how to filter the data, how to work with the data. One of the challenges we had is some of these data sets are very large. So that, like the water quality monitoring data, each year is 1 million records or more. So we had to break this down into different data sets, and we actually provide the data by annual, by year. It's all the water quality information that we have. So with that, you can start analyzing the chemistry of the data and the monitoring data, and you can compare that to MCLs or to any other criteria that you want to compare it with. Next. Greg, next. Oop. You're stuck there.
Sorry, it must be a live link. It's like taking.
It is a live link. Yeah, you probably did you click on it?
There we go.
Okay, so what I want to talk about is a little bit about what is the process of getting the data out of our databases. So as most of you know, the data lifecycle, the data is stored in databases, and from databases we can provide, what that data says, that what we call flat files, and then from there you can start, working, making the data more sense, putting into information, and finally knowledge. Next. I'm going to try to go this quickly through this. So this is the scary graph that Greg mentioned before. This is the SDWIS database. This is where we store our data. It's a relational database. It's a federal system. We don't have a lot of flexibility on making changes on this. We don't have flexibility on changing valid values, etc. So we had to work with this to convert it into actually what we call machine-readable data sets. And what is a machine-readable data set? I mean, we talk about this all the time in the open data resolution, but really it's about data sets that include as much information as possible. So there are organized in rows and columns that there are kind of have a unique values that are accessible through APIs and other, or being able to download. And the key here is that there are no duplicate records. For example, if you have a monitoring result, give me all that data associated with that monitoring event, but don't duplicate it. Don't create duplicate records. And also provide enough metadata so I don't have to go and join a table from another source. I mean, people who work with data all the time, they really appreciate that, because these are standalone data sets that requires very little data science or data manipulation to make it useful. Okay, so again, we're trying to make it reliable and up to date. Now, we went through a lot of technological challenges to create these data sets. Why? Because they are very complex. And it's hard to actually, it's easy to get the data wrong. So we were actually testing the data and how to make it this. With these data sets, you can join the different data sets together. Like you can link a water system to facilities, a facility to the water quality results. You can do all these manipulations of data. And again, every single of these data sets have a primary key that it will be the unique value that you can use. Okay. Next. And with the data set, you can group the data by county, by service area, by water system type. And we're going to get into all these details at the breakout groups. But then also allows you to summarize the data and use it with any purpose you have. Okay, next. So getting to the information part. And what is kind of the information that we want to get out of these data sets? And we had this, Greg and I, we've been having this question out there for a very long time. It's like, is my water quality getting better? How can I show that there is a trend that my water is improving or not? If the actions that the water agency is taking to ensure that the water is reliable and safe is actually getting better or not. Right now, we are providing a data set that is actually showing the number of violations, and which includes, what analytes have been listed as in violation, and also the enforcement actions taken to those violations. Paul is going to talk about this later in the details, but really it's very complex because a violation can receive multiple enforcement actions, and one enforcement action can address multiple violations. This is the typical issue of breaking these many-to-many relationships, and we have provided a data set that allows you to see both. So in the end, what we want to determine is the compliance or non-compliance periods for any water system. So here is the four main data sets that we are providing. We have water systems have facilities, and facilities have sample points where we actually collect the water quality monitoring results. And violations are determined by the district engineer based on that information. But right now, violations are not directly related to the actual water quality monitoring results. I mean, they are in theory, because the district engineer is using that data to determine that a system is in violation, but the data is not linked directly to it. So maybe this is an opportunity now to actually start looking at the different ways of connecting these data sets together. Next. So these are examples of how different users have manipulated this data in the past. We did have a list of violations published for a little while. We have republished it now for this event. But these are examples of how we are tracking counting violations, grouping violations by county, by assembly district, by analyte, different ways of using it. Next. This is also the community water center work on showing drinking water conditions for different sources of water. Next. And this is the NIST assessment dashboard that the Water Board is been putting together for the public to identify communities that are at risk of either because the water quality is not safe, or because the reliable, accessible water, or because the water is not affordable, etc. So we're going to be asking a lot of the questions about these data sets at the work groups. And Paul, you want to talk a little bit more the details of each one of these individual data sets?
Sure. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So hopefully you can see my screen. I just want to pick up on what Rafa said. I too am very interested in what feedback or comments you all have. My team and I have been trying to put information out there in bulk so that people can access this versus going to what many of you may have accessed before is our drinking water watch page, which is nice, but it only gives you a water system by water system snapshot. You can't download the data in bulk and play with it. So we recently reformatted the way that we publish water quality data, and we post that on our webpage. This data set that Rafa has posted kind of mimics what we put together, a large flat file of kind of all the information you would want to know when it comes to water quality data. So we have the actual district or the entity that's regulating the water system number, name. And as you go down the data set, we get into the information about where was this sample taken from. And the PS code is really an important parameter because it tells you where that sample was collected. And the PS code is really a concatenation of 3 fields. It is comprised of the water system number, and then this middle series of digits here, typically it's 3 digits, it can be up to 5, is the facility. And then after that, you have the sample point. And those are all concatenated together to represent and give a good indication of where this water quality data was being collected from. There's obviously nuances to all this data. Facilities can have many sample points within it. So as we see here, DST, this represents the distribution system. And distribution systems can have many sample points assigned to it, as water systems have to go around, to certain houses and collect water quality data. And in this case, it's for disinfection byproducts, your trihalomethanes, your haloacetic acids, and things like that. So there's some nuances there, but I just wanted to point out the PS code because you can link that to the SDWIS facility data set that was posted. And this SDWIS facility data set tries to give you a little bit more information in terms of the name of the facility, what type of facility it is, and what sample points are associated to it. So I have the data set showing on my screen for the facility data set. Again, we've got the entity that's regulating the water system. You have the water system number, name, activity status. A lot of this looks very similar. It's repeated in previous data sets. But as you scroll over, you'll start to get information about the facility ID. That's that middle number to the PS code. And well, what's the name of that facility ID? This happens to be well number 4. The facility type lets you know if it's a well. You've got various different facility types that are out there. The activity of the facility. And then we get to the sample point. And that is, if you recall, a facility can have many sample points in it. Typically, distribution systems and treatment plants will have multiple sample points in there. And then you'll have the sample point name. And then lastly, there's the violations and enforcement actions data set that Rafa mentioned. Again, the very familiar information right at the front, the agency that's regulating, public water system number, name, and then we get into the details about violation type code and violation name. What was it that the water system violated? And then we can see for this situation, it's related to the lead and copper rule. The water system failed to do follow-up or routine monitoring. And so that's why we see the analyte code and name reference lead and copper. Sometimes we're talking about actual MCL exceedances, maximum contaminant level exceedances, and that's where we might have further information to let you know what was the analysis result that caused the water system to be in violation for a certain analyte. And so we have a lot more information where appropriate and applicable in these columns here. I deal a lot with the SDWIS database, and Rafa mentioned it's a federal database. We don't have much ability to change it. I really wish we did, because it would allow us to make sure that the 241 SDWIS users that we have, 241 people going in to feed the data invariably means errors. And so we're trying to do the best that we can to track those down and fix them. One of the things that would really help us is if we could change the UI and guide users to get this data in correctly from the onset. So I'm throwing a caveat to some data errors that might exist. That's a high-level overview. I'll kick it back to you, Rafa or Greg, unless there's any questions.